less than 24 hours ago, President Trump met with Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. Now, this is the first time the two have reportedly come face to face since Trump took office for the second time. The meetup comes after the president has repeatedly called out Powell for not cutting interest rates.
So joining us now to break all this down is Chief Business Correspondent Taylor Young.
And Taylor, we'll start here. How common is it for a sitting president to meet with a Fed chair?
So it's not entirely out of the ordinary. It's not very frequent, but historically speaking, when these meetups do happen, it's by an invitation by the sitting president to the chair of the Fed. And that was absolutely the case here. According to the White House and the Federal Reserve, President Trump reached out to Jerome Powell to come to the White House and have this discussion. However, what does usually not happen during this meeting is any kind of discussions around monetary policy decisions. And before we get into what these two reportedly talked about, first let's kind of set the scene to what they were walking into. This meeting comes at what economists describe as a sensitive time for the U.S. economy. As we know, Trump over the last couple of months has been pushing tariffs on all imports coming into the U.S. And the Fed, on the other hand, for years now, has really been playing this balancing act with interest rates and stubborn inflation. On social media, Trump has repeatedly called for Powell to lower interest rates, saying it is putting the U.S. at an economic disadvantage compared to other countries. However, according to the Fed, Powell, quote, did not discuss his expectations for monetary policy meetups during this meeting, which I do think is interesting that the Fed made a point to include that in their statement, saying that none of these, policy discussions were brought up. But according to the Fed, the two reportedly talked about employment, interest rates, and how the economy is growing.
Policy decisions sounds fairly important right now. Why do they avoid this conversation?
Yeah, so this is a topic that is typically avoided when we see meetups like this, really to kind of avoid any kind of political pressure. And I think we have to kind of start with why the Fed was kind of created in the first place. It was created by Congress with its main goal to promote employment and stable prices. It is entirely independent, meaning the Fed can set, it could raise, it could drop interest rates with any kind of interference or approval by Congress or a sitting president. And I will say, broadly speaking, presidents usually like to kind of distance themselves from the Fed because the Fed is making, decisions about interest rates, and that's not always, publicly approved or approved by the public, because as we've seen over the last couple of years, interest rates have been increasing, and that impacts housing and impacts borrowing power. So yeah, this is usually something that the Fed is completely independent from. So even if a president or Congress were to kind of say, hey, what are you doing here? The Fed has the final say.
Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of people don't really realize, is that it's not technically run by the federal government here. They set their own decisions. So what are we expecting in terms of interest rates, even though there is that pressure? I think from everyone that has a high mortgage right now or trying to get into the housing market, they're like, let's cut those rates.
Yeah,
what do we expect?
Absolutely. So, if we've learned anything from over the last couple of years, this is not something that we can say for certain, right? We had economists last year go on the record saying we are expecting multiple interest rate cuts, and as we know, that didn't happen. Right now, rates are being held steadily. There is an anticipation, though, that there could be a couple cuts at the end of the year, but however, that is, as we know, going to depend on how the economy performs.
All right, Taylor, thank you very much. Appreciate it.